So in case you missed the clip that was going around on Twitter, Maddie posted a little segment, a snippet of a video that he posted in full. And I'll post the full video into our chats. So if you want to go support him over there. Anyway, but that's in chat. If you want to go check out the full video, I recommend that you do. But I thought that this clip that he posted kind of summarized the broader sentiment pretty well, pretty quickly. So just to give you a little deep dive on this, this is Maddie's reaction to it. And if you don't know Maddie, somehow at this point, he does Defining Duke, which is an Xbox specific podcast. So he is pretty entrenched in the Xbox ecosystem and Xbox happenings, let's just say. Didn't used to be totally committed to Xbox, but a couple of years ago, maybe he kind of leaned into that. So specialized in Xbox stuff. And so that's more where he puts his focus, which is fine. But that should give you kind of a context that this is a guy that has been trying to help Xbox and rooting for Xbox for a while. And I think this latest round of layoffs has just really broken a lot of the people that have tried to give them the benefit of the doubt.
How do execs who continue to fail at their job continue to make people who make the things they want them to make pay the price? I'm talking about not just Xbox, but I look at Bungie, I look at all these companies where execs are making god-awful decisions and the people who make the things are paying the price. Make it make sense at a certain point in time. It's very apparent now that this company is moving toward a multi-platform strategy, leaning into very popular IP from Marvel, from Lucasfilms, from their own portfolio like Fallout, like Elder Scrolls, but puppeteering the whole thing like it's a part of the big plan. This is what they had laid out for them all along. And I'm not going to advocate for more studio shutdowns, but simply by logic alone, we need to take an honest look at this, okay? We have here Tango Gameworks, who made a phenomenal game that, according to Xbox executives, sold well enough and earned itself a port to other platforms to sell more copies. And eventually, I imagine, will be announced to be sold on Nintendo Switch. They get shut down. Okay, but then you have 343 with the Halo license, who gets to fuck around for not one, not two, but 3 times in a row and stumble out the gate with a live service title, but yet they come out clean? What is the focus here? What is the rationale here? It makes no sense if you look at their behavior in the past versus now. I know 343 got hit with layoffs, but by all intents and purposes, by Xbox's logic with how they approach Bethesda here, that team should have been fully shut down for being incompetent multiple releases in a row. It underlines a consistent mediocrity in Xbox and Microsoft's ability to identify talent. I'm sorry, again, I'm not advocating for letting 343 go, but they're a phenomenal example of Xbox keeping around the...
Yeah, I did see somebody reply to this in the comments of the tweet. Somebody's like, so you're saying they should fire everybody? It's like, no, that's not the point. But it is funny if that's, can you imagine if that was the point? It's like they should just go scorched earth. Everybody loses their job. Start over.
Floundering, failing aspects of their business, just like their execs are currently, at the same time as getting rid of stuff that has a much higher ceiling than what they're currently holding on to. I'm sorry, was it a part of your plan to shadow drop your best game of 2023 and when it didn't get the sales you wanted, you shut the whole team down? Was that your big galaxy brain plan? This is going to give this studio the best chance to survive? Brilliant. Fucking brilliant.
Yeah, Maddie's not happy. Maddie's not happy. And neither are other Xbox-focused creators as well. You might recognize this individual, Klobrille. I don't know how to say it. But this guy does coverage based or focused on Xbox first-party studios across Xbox Game Studios, Bethesda, and Activision Blizzard. Always excited for the future. Maybe less so now. I mean, you can see that there's been previous posts by him about how frustrated he is with the Xbox leadership and all the layoffs and stuff. And just a broader, I mean, this was savage, a broader frustration with the closures that Xbox is responsible for. And I think a lot of people, especially like after these acquisitions were announced, it was phrased by Phil Spencer that they wanted to acquire these studios to give them the freedom to make games that they wouldn't be able to otherwise make. Or if they had one rough release, it wouldn't mean that they would necessarily all lose their jobs because they were backed by Microsoft. And these were explanations and promises basically made, not just to the gamers, but also to the employees. And there is basically no way of twisting it now other than that was a lie. That was not true. They bought all these studios with the understanding that they were going to keep some and dump others. And the criteria by which they determined what got to stay and what had to go is, in my view, it's pretty clear. And I'll get into that in a minute, because while I agree optically Tango Gameworks closing them down is laughably stupid. It's shocking that they did. Like, it's just stunning, because it's they, straight up last year, the only like really well received and unanimously agreed upon great game that they dropped that wasn't more controversial was of course Hi-Fi Rush. And the like Xbox leadership all talked about how impressed they were, how great it was, and then they shut them down within a year. Like it's crazy, a little over a year. I think I know why they closed them down. It's not like they were just going totally off the rails with it. I think I know why, and we'll get into that. But I still think it was a massive blunder. Like, just because you have one reason to do something, but like that doesn't mean that the decision's good, because there's 15 other things over here that would make that decision bad that they seemingly did not really consider. But again, we'll get into all of that. All of this to say, I think there's a really broad lack of morale within the Xbox community. And you see it all over the place, in the fans, in the devs, even in the executive leadership, where there's just a frustration in general that they have all the resources they could possibly need to be successful, and they can't get consistently high quality games out. And even when they do get a consistently or a high quality game out, they still end up getting shut down and they close down studios. Now, again, I think I know why, because Tango Gameworks is not necessarily the studio it was even 2 years ago. But there's very little confidence within the dev staff across like Microsoft's studios at this point. There's no confidence that if you do really good work, you'll necessarily be rewarded for it. Like Sony Santa Monica, they know, because they did God of War 2018 and then Ragnarok, they know at this point, okay, we can take some risks. Because even if our experimental sci-fi game we're working on doesn't pay off, we'll still be okay. We'll still manage to be given another chance. There's confidence and trust within Sony and PlayStation and those studios. Now, in the last year, a lot of that confidence has also been eroded, because even people at Sony first-party studios have seen layoffs, but at least they're not full studio closures. Whereas Microsoft here is just coming out with the sledgehammer and cracking skulls. But what was interesting about this is Clobro also posted this little 24-second clip that has not aged that great.
Developer Lionhead.
We acquired Lionhead in 2006, shut it down in 2016. A couple years later, we reflected back on that experience. What did we learn? How do we not repeat our same mistakes?
You acquire a studio for what they're great at now, and your job is to help them accelerate how they do what they do, not them accelerate what you do.
And that little statement at the end by Phil Spencer, which describes his methodology for acquisitions and how they handle this, that seems to be completely antithetical to their current modus operandi. As you can see, you acquire a studio for what they're great at now, and your job is to help them accelerate how they do what they do, not accelerate them, or not them accelerate what you do. I wish Lionhead were still a viable studio. Now, I think that this sentiment here reflects why we saw the layoffs that we did yesterday, and why I think even the layoffs that are to come will continue to echo this sentiment, because a lot of people make the mistake of assuming that certain studios are monoliths, that once they are established, they are that way forever. And that's not the case. When you're talking about 5, 6, 7 year dev cycles between big releases, a lot of people move in and out of studios during that time. Sometimes somebody might work on a game in the first couple of years and then move to a different studio, and they could have worked on 3 different games by the time that first one launches, which is weird and crazy, but that's just how the gaming industry is. It's sort of a hyper exaggerated form of the tech industry, where in the tech industry you're expected to just move around and change positions all the time. Whereas it didn't used to be that way. It used to be that you could stay at a job within a studio for like 10, 20, 30 years, and that was pretty normal. Now, especially when you're trying to climb the ladder, it's pretty standard to move around a lot. And as a result, these studios change a lot. And so just because a studio did something really great back in like 2016 does not mean that that studio in that form exists today, which is like, for example, exactly what happened with Redfall. With Redfall, Jason Schreier reported at Bloomberg that roughly 70% of the team that made Prey at Arcane Austin was gone by the time Redfall launched. 70%. And after Redfall launched, even more of those people left. So people are like, well, but Arcane Austin, they made Prey. You can't just shut that studio down. And I think the small mistake is to assume that it's the same studio, because while they may share a building, they may share a title, and some, executives might be the same, the individuals that actually do the work and put the game together, totally different. And it's like a Ship of Theseus thing where you've replaced all the boards on the ship slowly, because the example of Ship of Theseus is like if you replace, we could even use an example like the Lego Hogwarts castle behind me. If I go through and I replace each and every brick on that whole castle, at what point does it stop being the original castle? Is it when I replace the tower? Is it when I replace this? Or is it after the very first piece? It's no longer the same tower, same castle. And with studio replacements, you're talking about basically all the pieces except for maybe this tower. Everything else has been replaced. Is it still the same tower that it once was? Is it the same castle that it once was? Or is it something fundamentally different? And I think for a lot of these executives, they're looking at it, and with something like Arcane Austin, they are looking at it and saying, like they do in this clip, you acquire a studio for what they're great at now, and your job is to help them accelerate how they do what they do. For somebody like Arcane Austin, what they did or what they do at this point are live service, like co-op shooters. That's what their team currently has been built up to make, and they didn't do a particularly great job of it. So they just decided, we'll just move on. We'll cut them and move on. Because it's just too much work to try and fix the studio instead of just starting over somewhere else. Instead of trying to accelerate them or use them to accelerate what you do and to do something that they're not necessarily experts in anymore. And that's when they determine that the studio might not be viable anymore. So that could explain Arcane Austin's closure. And I don't think that shocked anybody that much. But Tango Gameworks, that closure really shocked people because just a year ago, they did a tremendous job with Hi-Fi Rush, even according to Xbox's own devs. And look at this. Tango Gameworks is your Xbox Studio of the Year 2023. So he did a little survey. Everybody voted this the studio of the year, which is crazy. And now it doesn't exist. But there's potential explanations for why. So like the founder of Tango Gameworks left the studio, Shinji Mikami, and Ikumi Nakamura also left a couple years ago to make her own studio. And apparently when they left, they took a lot of talent with them. So by the time we got Hi-Fi Rush, that was basically an original, very different product that had been put together over a few years and was very exceptionally good. Very exceptional. Emphasis on exception. It seems to be the case that with Tango Gameworks, the team that made it so successful for the last decade, it seems like a lot of those people have also left Tango Gameworks. So it's possible that they looked at it and they were just like, we could get another sequel to Hi-Fi Rush and maybe that's worth it. But the people we really wanted that were our money makers, which were like Shinji Mikami and Ikumi Nakamura, they're no longer there. The people that liked working with them left with them to go on work on other projects and stuff at other companies and studios. So they might have just decided to cut ties. Optically, I still think it's a massive blunder, but I think Xbox evaluated a lot of things and just decided that those were perhaps the weak links in the chain. Whereas like 343, those guys, the team behind Halo, they at the very least I think are generating some revenue. Whereas like Redfall and Hi-Fi Rush at this point are comparatively perhaps less profitable or revenue generators. But I still think it's a massive, massive blunder. And all told, I mean, it just goes to show you again that there is some sort of major, major problem within Xbox where they don't know how to consistently drop quality titles. They just don't know how to do it. And it's been this way for a decade at least. Even though they have some world-class talent, they cannot figure out how to support those teams. They can't figure out how to empower them to do the best stuff that they possibly can. At some point, you would think that the executive leadership would be held responsible, but for some reason, they just keep trying to do the same thing over and over and over and over again. I think Microsoft has completely given up on Japan and are refocusing on Europe, which honestly makes sense. Perhaps, I mean, they could just be pivoting. They've made a bunch of like licensing deals, is my understanding, with Square Enix and other similar devs. So instead of trying to do first party stuff that appeals to those markets, maybe that is what they're doing and they're just closing them down. But I would argue that Tango Gameworks was far from like exclusively Japan focused. Like I don't think that was the primary concern for them. Tango Gameworks with Hi-Fi Rush, for example, had a huge Western audience, you know? Game Pass kills game sales, same dev costs, stagnating sub base. Yes, I think Game Pass really alters player expectations. It generates a lot of value, but the problem is if Xbox ever has a game that's available on their platform and maybe also available elsewhere, you just have a lot of people that just are saying, oh, I'll wait for it to come to Game Pass. And that is a big problem for a lot of these studios, where we've even said it with like Skull and Bones, for example, where they're trying to charge $70 for that game. And we say, no, I wouldn't mess with it now. For $70 freaking dollars, don't do it. But if it ever comes to like Game Pass, then maybe boot it up, play it for a few hours and see if you can get some fun out of it. That small shift really hinders the performance of a lot of these games and limits what they can do and how they can be received, because already you're starting at a disadvantage where if the game is not phenomenal, people just say wait. And if you're going to wait, all of a sudden, like a 50% discount on a $70 game for you might be enough for you to try it. But for the publisher and devs, that represents, you know, they need to sell twice as many copies to break even, much less make a profit. And I think that there's just a hurricane of problems in the games industry that's stacking up all at the same time, where games are too expensive to make, quality has stagnated or even dropped on a AAA scale. So gamers are less likely to just throw $70 at your game to see if it's good. With the popularization of YouTubers and streamers and stuff, people are getting a better idea of what games are like before they buy them. And with other services like Game Pass or Ubisoft Plus or PlayStation Plus, they're getting access to a lot of these games for free. And so after a set period of time, so they're just deciding to wait. And when you factor in all the other broader economic problems in the world right now, it starts to make sense, where people are, you know, starting to have to pay much closer attention to their budgets. They're having to be very, very cautious and careful where they spend money. And they don't want to just throw $70 at something that might suck. So they're being much more cautious, as they should be. And all of it's landing at the same time as broader spending in the games industry is dropping, and cost of living globally has skyrocketed. So cost of developing these games has also skyrocketed. There's just so many things that stack up, and it's all hitting at the same time. And so companies like Microsoft are trying to find ways to stabilize their budgets and stuff. But I would argue that they are making very one-dimensional choices that maybe make sense when you're looking at a spreadsheet, but I don't think they're factoring in the human element of a lot of these decisions. They started chopping with a heavy hand, and they've got themselves into trouble now. And I mean, Xbox content creators tend to be pretty forgiving, and so for them to start losing it on Phil Spencer is a pretty bad sign for Phil. And I mean, you can see ex-Blizzard boss says Phil Spencer will be hurting as much as anyone else over the Xbox studio closures. Probably not as much as the people that were actually laid off. He's probably doing better than them. I hate to be the guy that pointed that out, but yeah, I'm sure it's a very sad day at Xbox headquarters while he drives his McLaren back home. You know, it like, okay. Okay. And this is coming from Mikey Barra. Is the same guy. I believe this is the guy. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. Isn't this the guy that he was saying how like you should be able to tip after playing a game? He was saying it would be good if there was a pop-up at the end of a video game you played where you could tip the devs or the studio like $10 or an extra $20 or something. I think that's this guy. Yeah, it is that guy. Okay. I thought so. Yeah, this is another guy who I just think is horribly out of touch. I just think, unfortunately, there's just a lot of poor decisions happening. And I think Microsoft is trying to run their gaming division, which is it's a bunch of artists and creative types, and they're trying to run it like you run a team of engineers. And it doesn't work that way. It's fundamentally different. If you've ever tried to be involved in directing any sort of creative team, whether like you've tried to be a director of a play in school or a community theater or something, or if you've ever tried to make like content with graphic designers and stuff, managing creative types is fundamentally different than managing like very plain, very straightforward engineers. Engineers, you can just tell them, no, that doesn't work, go back and fix it. If you'd say and treat artists like that, it's not received the same way. Like often you have to alter your approach in how you communicate things. And this is something that's been discussed in all sorts of like documentaries on different games. I think they even mentioned it. Was it in Raising Kratos when they describe how the producers' jobs are to find ways to work with different teams? I think it is. Look at this. So this is specifically, if anybody's like, oh, Luke, it's offensive to say that artists need to be treated differently than programmers and stuff. These are the people that made God of War saying the exact same thing. Okay, so check it out.
I have almost 30 people in my department, and artists tend to be a little bit introverted, dramatic, read into things, very sensitive, because, you know, you're an artist. That's natural. It's all okay. But every single person that I need to deal with needs to be dealt with in a different way.
If everything goes right, then I feel that I can get all of the stuff in. But as you can see, like I was just showing you stuff and there's a bunch of stuff.
We're gonna leave now because everything's going wrong.
For me, at least, I think a big part of it is maintaining that focus with the team.
So teams have to be managed differently, but I think Microsoft is trying to run Xbox the way you would run the Windows 11 team, and it just doesn't work that way. You can't just outsource the coding of this big chunk of the software to a sweatshop in India and end up with a high quality product. It just doesn't work that way. You can't lay off whole teams and they just shrug and go, well, that happens. It's a corporate world. Like, it just doesn't work that way. My dad has worked as a project manager with many big companies, including Microsoft. I remember growing up in like 2006, we lived in Minneapolis, and my dad was interviewing for like a head honcho, like VP position at Microsoft for some team. I don't know. I was like 9. I don't really remember details, but it was good. He didn't end up getting the job because the guy that got the job was laid off when the 2008 financial crisis hit. And so he kind of dodged a bullet on that one. But with that, I mean, I remember it was like they would have whole teams that would just be laid off, and then they just outsource all their work to India. And that was just what Microsoft would do. And you can't do that type of thing in the games industry. It just doesn't work like that. Yeah, I started working in the Microsoft Paint division. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, all of this, so Norcat, Microsoft is fine. Layoffs and closures happen. The sky's not falling. No, so let me be clear. Microsoft is absolutely fine. Xbox as a brand within the gaming industry, I think, took a major blow yesterday. One that they probably are relatively surprised they took, or maybe they haven't even realized they've taken the blow yet, simply because I think they're running the company wrong. I think they're trying to run it like you'd run any other big team within Microsoft, and it just won't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. Satya's really good at running teams of engineers and finding ways to invest in AI infrastructure and managing Azure and all of those things that make Microsoft so successful. But I don't think he knows how to work with teams of creative types. There's a reason why people who tend to be really good in artistic endeavors are maybe not the best when it comes to the business side of things. He's really good at the business side of things, probably not great at the artistic, creative side of things. And that's why Steve Wozniak, actually, back in the day, Steve Wozniak said in every successful company, or maybe it was Steve Jobs, but basically he said in the founding of Apple, he said every company needs the hippie and you need the nerd, which was just kind of like an off the cuff way of describing how you need the guy that's creative and thinks really out of the box, and then the guy that thinks very analytically and linearly and can just break it down piece by piece and run it like a business. And it just doesn't work to have one focused entirely on the other and outside of their resources. So all this to say, Microsoft will absolutely be fine, but I think Xbox's brand under the Microsoft banner, I think Xbox's brand is pretty significantly tarnished, and I think we'll feel the side effects of a lot of these decisions in the coming months and years, as quality at Xbox Studios probably doesn't average that much higher, because teams have seen, even when they release the best game for Xbox of the entire year, they could still end up getting shut down. And why would you stick around at a company if that's going to be the case? I mean, you just wouldn't.
He took my thing. Red flag.